morning, Alamance Presbyterian Church. In the many conversations I've had with you all over the last few weeks, one of you suggested that for a devotional, I might do some cooking with you. And so today, I bring you Pastor Jess's cooking class. We're going to be making a gluten-free, sugar-free banana chocolate chip muffin. It utilizes a blender, but other than that, you don't need any fancy tools or equipment. And before we begin, I wanted to recognize the spirituality of this experience with a poem in one of my favorite cookbooks, which is written by a monk. It's a book called the Tassajara Bread Book, and it's by the monk Edward Espe Brown. And so the part of that poem I want to read you to sort of center ourselves before we get started baking this morning is this. Cook, offer yourself, hold nothing back. Cooking is not like you expected, not like you anticipated. What is happening is unheard of, never before experienced. You cook, no mistakes. You might do it differently next time, but you did it this way this time. Things are as they are. Even if you say too much this, too little that, and if you want things to stay the same, remind yourself they have no unchanging nature. Wherever you go, remember there you are. Okay? Go ahead. Keep moving. Watch your step. Great guidance for any experiment in the kitchen, and everything in the kitchen is an experiment. So with that being said, let's get started. In order to make this recipe, you're going to need a couple basic ingredients. First of all, you're going to need bananas. You can see that mine are a little ripe. They are easier to mash when they're ripe, so that's why they look like that. I let them get this way and then I freeze them, and frequently I'll make this recipe with frozen bananas that I've thawed. You're also going to need rolled oats. If you want these to be gluten-free, you need to make sure you get gluten-free rolled oats. Baking powder, baking soda, salt, 2 eggs, yogurt, applesauce, and chocolate chips. I also really like to put chia seeds in mine. They add a little bit of a nutty flavor, and they're also really good for your liver enzymes. So I just put a tablespoon of that in at the end. Also, of course, you're going to need chocolate chips, which we'll put in at the end as well. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need to do is you'll get 2 bananas. And usually I actually, I double this recipe, but I'm not going to today because I have some of these muffins in the freezer already. I like to keep these muffins frozen, not only so they keep longer because these are pretty dense, so they'll mold quickly if you leave them out for too long, but also because it's a lot faster, healthier, and easier than any kind of a frozen pastry, and it takes about the same amount of time. So you have kids and they're trying to get out the door in the morning, you can pop one of these bad boys in the toaster if it's frozen, toast it for about 10 minutes. I put peanut butter on mine because then it has a lot of protein too. It's a really, really great breakfast, and it's super duper filling too. So we have our bananas in here. Oh, first thing you have to do before you even do anything with the ingredients is you have to preheat your oven. So make sure that your oven is preheated to 350 degrees, and you're going to want to grease your muffin tin. So you can use a standard muffin tin like this. As I said, I like to eat these for breakfast every day, so I use a larger muffin tin like this one. And I'll grease it usually with olive oil. Sometimes I'll use coconut oil, but this is already pre-greased. You can use cupcake liners or muffin liners if you want to. Personally, I make muffins for my consumption, and the liners eat half of my muffin. I'm not paying the liners to eat my muffin, so why would I do that? I just go naked, use a little bit of oil. So my banana, you can see, is all in here ready to go. And I'm now going to mash it up. And if you're fancy, you can use a masher. But if you're not fancy, you can also use a fork. It doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure that the banana is nice and smooshed in the bowl. And I usually stir it up a little bit after I've smooshed it. And it comes out looking like this. right? Mashed banana, yummo. And then I like to add kind of my wet ingredients. So I'll add my applesauce. This recipe calls for 1/3 cup of applesauce. That's about how much I have left in this jar, which is why I'm just using the jar itself. The next thing it calls for is 2 eggs. So far my ingredients are 2 mashed bananas, 2 eggs, and 1/3 cup of applesauce. Now if you want to, you can use sugar instead of applesauce, or you can use honey, agave syrup, maple syrup, whatever. It's gonna change the taste of the muffins a little bit, but if you want a sweeter muffin, then sugar's the way to go. I like applesauce because it doesn't affect the taste of the muffin that much to me, and it's just another fruit, and it's really good for people that are diabetic, which I'm not, but I know there are folks in our congregation who are, so I just thought I'd use applesauce this time. The next thing we're gonna add here is 1/2 cup of Greek yogurt. And again, some people are really into measuring things. I have a measuring cup here if I need it. I've made this recipe so many times, and I'm so kind of not scared of any margin of error that I can just kind of glop it in and eyeball it, and I feel comfortable doing that. If you don't though, that's totally fine. Use measuring cups. Baking in particular, a lot of people ascribe as an exact science. I am not that person, but it can get really delicate in terms of like weighing flours and certain things. That's what you're going to encounter a lot if you're doing a lot of yeasted breads, but this is a non-yeasted recipe. It depends on baking powder and baking soda for the rising action, so it's not necessarily as delicate a balance. This is what we call a quick bread instead of a yeasted bread, because it doesn't have to depend on the yeast to break down, so it bakes up a lot faster than regular. So once you have all your wet ingredients in there, just kind of give them a stir around. And you can also use vanilla in this recipe if you want to. A little bit, about a teaspoon of vanilla extract if you like that flavor. Again, I find that it doesn't really do that much to the flavor profile for me, so I just don't include it. Vanilla's expensive. I don't need to spend money on vanilla. So now that I've stirred all that up, it's looking really good, nice and creamy. Just like that. Ooh, it almost fell out of the bowl. Ooh, that would have been really bad. So that's all ready to go. And now I'm gonna start to add my dry ingredients. The main dry ingredient we have here that makes it gluten-free is oats. You'll need to make sure you buy oats that are labeled gluten-free if you need this to be gluten-free. My oven has preheated. So you're gonna need 2 1/4 cups of your rolled oats. I'm going to move this now just so you can see a little better. And now you're going to get into your baking powder, your baking soda, and your salt. So the recipe calls for 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We who are the salt of the earth know the value of salt. It calls for 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And then it calls for 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And this is really important. Don't just use baking soda. You need to use baking powder. It's actually the agent that does most of the work of getting stuff to rise in this recipe. So really important that you have baking powder. So now that all my dry ingredients are in here, it's time to blend. So let's get on. So for a blender, you can use a traditional blender if you want to, but I really prefer what's called an immersion blender or a hand blender. So this is just a very basic KitchenAid one. They cost like between $15 and $30 depending on what kind you get. And it's just this part that's plugged into the wall here, and then this is the blade on the base. And you can put it inside of things, so you can make soup, you can make muffins, you can do all kinds of stuff with them. They're really easy. I actually bought this because I used to make soap, and you have to stir soap for hours and hours so that it will saponify. And so I actually bought this so I could use it to make soap, and now I don't make soap anymore, but it's very convenient for these muffins. So now we're gonna blend all the ingredients together. This is probably boring to watch because you can't see what's happening in the bowl. But I usually blend for like between 3 and 5 minutes. It's pretty easy. And I'll show you the consistency in terms of what this looks like once we're done. You want to make sure you keep your blender kind of straight up and down while you're doing this. Otherwise, you will get oats and eggs and pieces of banana all over yourself and your kitchen. So if you're using an immersion blender, make sure you keep it in the substance you're blending. Especially if it's soup, you don't want hot soup all over the place. All right, so that's all blended up. Get all the batter kind of off of my blended thing, and it'll look like this. You see? It's just kind of like a soupy oatmeal look. And now it's time to add, if you want to use chia, this is when I put in the chia, and this is when you put in your chocolate chips. Of course, chocolate chips do have sugar, but since we put in applesauce, we can kind of put in a little more. So chia, generally I put in about a tablespoon. Oops. And I spilled some. And yes, this is the chia of Chia Pet fame. So if you want to cook with it, you can. If you want some weird terracotta animal to grow hair, you can do that too. So I put my chia in there, and then generally the recipe calls for about a ½ cup of chocolate chips, which is about a handful. But as I said, we went sugar-free, so I throw in an extra handful or two. I also love chocolate. Chocolate's really good for you. I'm using mini chocolate chips. You can use regular chocolate chips as well. So you don't need to go totally crazy with the chocolate, but you do want to make sure that there's enough in there that it gets that little sweetness and it tastes really good. It makes you excited about eating breakfast in the morning. So once you put that stuff in, you're going to stir it all up so that everything's nice and folded in there well. And then we're going to put it in our muffin tin. So our muffin tin is ready to go. It's already been greased, unless you're using those little liners that I already talked about. So now we get to just fill this up with our batter. And when you're filling up muffin tins, you want to get them about 3/4 of the way full. That's if they're big cups, little cups, whatever, because you don't want them to overflow and have like Almondo Grosso muffin. And you also want them to bake all the way through, because muffins and a lot of other baked goods have raw eggs in them, and we don't want anybody to get salmonella because we didn't bake our muffins all the way through. So make sure you fill them up about 3/4 of the way full. If they're a little more full than that, that's okay. But generally you don't want to go too much more than that. So all our muffin tins are full. And now, of course, if you have littles who want to lick this, they can. But seeing as I don't have littles and this has chocolate in it, so I can't feed it to my dog. Also, there's quite a lot left in there, right? Leave no muffin behind. So we're going to make sure that this goes to good use. So I'm going to evenly spread that out between the last of the muffin tins here. And then we're going to put this in the oven. For regular muffin tins, it's going to be about 18 to 20 minutes. These will take a little bit longer, kind of closer to 23 to 25. So now we're going to put these in the oven and we'll see what they look like when they come out. Da, 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 da. Oh, it fogged up the camera lens. Look at that. Beautiful. Now that our yummy, yummy muffins are out of the oven, we're gonna let them cool for about 20 minutes, and then comes the best part, eating them. So I hope that you enjoyed this recipe, that you enjoy this video. I like to put peanut butter on the muffins when they're all done. You might use butter. Like jam is really good on them too. So I'll leave that up to you, but I hope that you enjoy your muffins. And I love you and I miss you, and I'll see you next week. Bye, Alamance.